You've used ChatGPT, or you've at least heard about it. But almost nobody actually knows what it's doing when it answers you. What is happening inside that system between the moment you hit send and the moment the answer appears? Today we're going to answer that, because once you understand what's actually happening, a lot of things about AI start making sense, including why it sometimes gets things spectacularly wrong. This is part of our ongoing series, Breaking Down AI from the Ground Up. Videos 1 and 2 covered what AI is and what machine learning is. Links in the description. This video builds on both of those. Okay, let's talk about what ChatGPT is actually doing. First, what kind of system is ChatGPT? Because understanding the category helps understand the behavior. ChatGPT is what's called a large language model, or LLM for short. We're going to do a full dedicated video on large language models because they deserve it. But for today, here's what you need to know. A large language model is an AI system trained on an enormous amount of text, hundreds of billions of words. Books, articles, websites, code, conversations, scientific papers, essentially a large portion of everything humanity has written and published online. During training, the model learned one core skill. Given a sequence of words, predict what word comes next. That's the fundamental task. Predict the next word. Do that billions of times across hundreds of billions of examples, and something remarkable happens. The model gets so good at predicting the next word that it starts to appear as though it actually understands language, understands concepts, understands you. It doesn't understand in the way you understand, but it has become extraordinarily good at producing outputs that look like it does. Now here's where it gets interesting. ChatGPT isn't just a raw large language model. It went through an additional training process on top of the base training that makes it dramatically more useful to talk to. That process is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF for short. Here's how it works. After the base model was trained on all that text, human trainers had conversations with it. They rated different responses, which answers were more helpful, which were more accurate, which were more appropriate. The model then learned from those ratings. It adjusted to produce the kinds of responses humans preferred. This is why ChatGPT feels like talking to a helpful assistant rather than a raw text generator. That helpful assistant behavior was deliberately trained in through human feedback. So now you type a question. What actually happens? Your message gets converted into something called tokens. Tokens are chunks of text, sometimes a full word, sometimes part of a word. The sentence, "What is AI?" becomes 4 or 5 tokens, depending on how the system breaks it up. Those tokens get converted into numbers. Everything in these systems is math. Words become numbers. Those numbers flow through billions of mathematical operations, through what are called neural network layers. Each layer transforms the numbers based on patterns the model learned during training. At the end of all those transformations, the model outputs a probability distribution, essentially a ranked list of, given everything I've processed, what word is most likely to come next. It picks a word. Then it does the whole thing again. Now the input includes your original message plus the word it just generated. It predicts the next word again, and again, and again, word by word, token by token, until it decides the response is complete. That is what's happening every time you see text streaming onto your screen. It is not retrieving an answer from a database. In its base form, it is not looking anything up in real time, though some versions now have web search capabilities built on top of the core model. At its core, it is generating one token at a time based on statistical patterns learned from training data. There is one more concept worth understanding here. It is called the context window. Think of it as the model's working memory. Every time you send a message, the model can only see a certain amount of text at once, your current message plus some portion of the conversation history. That limit is the context window. When a conversation gets very long, the model starts losing access to earlier parts of it. This is why ChatGPT sometimes seems to forget things you told it earlier in a long conversation. It is not being careless. It literally cannot see that far back anymore. Understanding this helps you use these tools more effectively. For long, complex tasks, start a fresh conversation. Keep your context focused. This explains a lot about how these systems behave. It explains why they're so fluent. The model has processed so much human text that it has deeply internalized how language flows, how sentences are structured, how arguments are built, how explanations work. It also explains why they make things up. Because the model is not checking facts, it is predicting what words should come next based on patterns. Sometimes those patterns lead it to generate something that sounds completely plausible and is completely wrong. This is called hallucination. It is not a glitch, it is a fundamental consequence of how these systems work. The model is optimized to produce fluent, coherent text, not to verify that every claim it makes is true. Here is a concrete example of how this plays out. Ask ChatGPT to cite sources for something it just told you. It will often give you URLs or paper titles that look completely legitimate, correct format, plausible authors, reasonable journal names. And when you go to check them, they do not exist. The model generated citations that fit the pattern of what a real citation looks like, because that is what it does. It generates text that fits patterns. It did not lie to you intentionally. It has no concept of intentionality. It just produced the most statistically likely next tokens, and fake citations are statistically very similar to real ones in terms of structure and format. Understanding this one thing will change how you use these tools. Always verify anything important. Treat the output as a very confident first draft, not as ground truth. Now, ChatGPT is not the only system of this kind. It is just the most well-known. Claude is made by Anthropic, Gemini is made by Google, Grok is made by xAI, Llama is made by Meta. They all operate on the same fundamental principles: large-scale training on text, next token prediction, fine-tuning to improve helpfulness and safety. They have different training data, different fine-tuning approaches, different strengths and weaknesses, but the core mechanism is the same across all of them. The reason so many companies are building these systems is that the technology turned out to be extraordinarily capable. Every major tech company realized this at roughly the same time. What followed was one of the most intense periods of technological investment in history. Billions of dollars and thousands of researchers all racing to build bigger, more capable, and more reliable versions of this same fundamental idea. That race is still accelerating today. So how do you actually use these tools well, given everything we just covered? A few principles that follow directly from understanding how they work. First, be specific. The more context you give the model, the better its predictions will be. Vague questions get vague answers. Detailed questions get detailed answers. Second, verify anything important. Dates, facts, statistics, citations, always check. The model sounds confident regardless of whether it is right. Third, iterate. These systems generate one response, but that does not mean it is the best response. Ask it to try again. Ask it to approach the problem differently. Ask it to be more concise or more detailed. The model is not tired. It does not get frustrated. Use that. Fourth, understand what it cannot do. It cannot browse the internet in its base form. It does not know what happened after its training cutoff date. It cannot perform actions in the real world. Knowing the boundaries makes you a much more effective user. So let's bring it home and recap what we covered today. When you type a message to ChatGPT or any other large language model, you are not talking to something that thinks. You are not talking to something that knows. You are talking to a system that has processed an almost incomprehensible amount of human language and learned to generate responses that are statistically likely to be useful, accurate, and coherent based on everything it has seen. It is a pattern-matching system operating at a scale that produces genuinely useful outputs. Most of the time, not all of the time. The people who get the most out of these tools are the ones who understand what they are. They use them for what they're good at. They verify what matters, and they don't mistake fluency for intelligence. If this video made ChatGPT make a little more sense, hit subscribe. Every week, we break down something in AI that sounds complicated and explain it clearly. Next week, what is a large language model actually? We touched on it today. Next week, we go deep. See you then.